In a U-turn in policy, US President Joe Biden's administration informed that it will support a proposal submitted to the World Trade Organization to suspend intellectual property rights on vaccines against COVID-19. At least 25 people were killed this Thursday when heavily armed police stormed a favela in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro, allegedly in pursuit of drug traffickers. Violent repression by state security forces against anti-government demonstrators in Colombia continues, with at least 37 people killed. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The leaders of India, South Africa and Russia welcomed this Thursday the United States' decision to stop blocking the lifting of intellectual property rights on vaccines at the World Trade Organization. The waiver would allow massive domestic production of vaccines across the world. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical giant shares plunged at stock markets in reaction to the news. After the US announcement, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said the bloc is now ready to discuss the joint India-South Africa proposal for a waiver on COVID-19 patents, introduced last year at the WTO in Geneva, which has been blocked by the United States, the United Kingdom and the European Union up until now. However, pharmaceutical companies are urging US President Joe Biden to reverse the decision as they saw their shares plunge at global stock markets. The waiver still faces intense negotiations at the World Trade Organization in order to proceed.
The President's view is that the major platforms have a responsibility related to the health and safety of all Americans to stop amplifying untrustworthy content, disinformation and misinformation, especially related to COVID-19, vaccinations, and elections.
And this Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he supported the idea of a waiver on patent protections for coronavirus vaccines as Russia registered its fourth virus jab called Sputnik Light.
From Europe, an idea that, in my opinion, deserves attention, namely, to remove patent protections from COVID-19 vaccines altogether. Russia would, of course, support such an approach in current circumstances. As I have said many times, we should not think about how to extract maximum profit, but about how to ensure people's safety.
In the meantime, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa reiterated his support for easing vaccine patent restrictions to spur the production of low-cost generic vaccines and help poorer countries that are struggling to immunize their populations.
Such a waiver should facilitate effective transfer of intellectual property, technology and know-how on mutually beneficial terms. This will ensure production is ramped up across many countries to ensure timely, affordable and equitable access to diagnostics, vaccines and therapeutics.
Pfizer and biotech announced on Thursday they're donating vaccine doses to inoculate athletes for this summer's Tokyo Olympics. According to a joint statement, the pharmaceutical consortium said they would donate doses to help vaccinate athletes and their delegations who are taking part in the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Delivery is expected to begin later this month. Thomas Bach, the president of the Olympic Committee, said that the donation of vaccines is another tool in the toolbox of measures to help make the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games safe and secure for all participants and to show solidarity with the Japanese hosts. In Bolivia, state organizations involved in the administration of justice and activists against gender-based violence announced a new drive to fight against the delay of justice in cases of femicide and domestic violence. Our correspondent Freddy Morales brings us the details.
Prosecutors and judicial authorities, together with activists against gender and domestic violence, announced a new campaign to address the drama of delayed justice in cases of femicide. This operation will be carried out in the 9 districts of Bolivia in order to identify the endemic ill that affects the justice system, such as judicial delay and corruption. The campaigns carried out so far have achieved progress.
777 cases of those that have already been concluded with a resolution. There are only 268 pending. We are talking about 509 cases of femicides that have already been concluded.
The almost 800 cases in the statistics refer to cases of femicide in which judicial proceedings have been opened since 2013, when a law against domestic violence came into force. There is even a legislative committee that monitors the delay of justice. Forensic audits in those cases in which there is a delay of justice that have been abandoned, filed in some cases. It will be possible to identify why they were abandoned, why each case was filed, why the criminal type was changed. It was reiterated that official statistics do not reflect the reality of this tragedy in Bolivian society, due to the fact that there is still reluctance on the part of the victims to report it. There is a lack of reporting culture. There are people, women or children, who have been assaulted who keep quiet because of the threats they have received. Generally, these types of cases happen within the four walls of the home. That is the reason for the recommendation. Generally, the children have been attacked by relatives, stepfathers. We arrive home and we do not talk to our children. In the department of La Paz alone, in the first 4 months of the year, there were 2,341 reports of domestic violence, 10 femicides, 112 reports of rape, and 67 reports of rape of an infant or child.
Freddy Morales, teleSUR, Bolivia.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Thursday in Brazil, heavily armed police stormed a favela in the city of Rio de Janeiro, allegedly in pursuit of drug traffickers, killing at least 25 people in what activists called one of the deadliest raids in the city's history. Our correspondent Brian Meir has the story.
In the favela of Jacarezinho in Rio de Janeiro this morning, the police made an armed incursion against alleged drug traffickers. Shots were exchanged, and by the end of the operation, 25 people were dead, including one police officer, and several completely innocent civilians had been hit by stray bullets, including 2 people who were just trying to get to work on the metro as it pulled out of Triagem station near the community. Now, it's important to realize that these kinds of operations in Rio de Janeiro have been going on since the war against drugs began in the 1980s. But what makes this one different is that in June of 2020, the Supreme Court prohibited these kinds of operations in favelas during the pandemic. So, a lot of people in Rio de Janeiro had their hopes up that human rights would improve after the impeachment of neo-fascist Governor Wilson Witzel, but it looks like his replacement is continuing Witzel's lead. He's ordering armed incursions and killings of low-level drug traffickers in poor neighborhoods when the crime of drug trafficking is not punishable by death in Brazil.
Thank you, Brian. For the 9th consecutive day, this Thursday, Colombians took to the streets once again in defiance of a violent crackdown by security forces and to demand the implementation of social policies to overcome the economic crisis resulting from the pandemic. According to the NGO Temblores, which provides information on police abuse, over 1,700 cases of police violence have been reported. Of these, over 200 people have suffered physical violence by the police and 37 have been killed. 22 people have sustained eye injuries as a result of the deliberate police practice of shooting at demonstrators' faces. Over 800 people have been arrested and 10 cases of sexual abuse by security forces have been confirmed. And on Thursday, British and Irish trade unions sent a letter to the foreign ministries of both countries to condemn the intense state violence taking place in Colombia since the latest round of national strike protests began on April 28th. With human rights organisations reporting up to 37 people killed by state security forces so far and hundreds more injured and detained, the unions have called for the British and Irish governments to formally denounce the violence and to demand accountability for the perpetrators. The letter, signed by Britain's Trades Union Congress, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the Scottish Trades Union Congress, as well as 20 other individual unions, reaffirmed their commitment to not stay silent in the face of these brutal attacks against demonstrators and stated their support for the right of every Colombian to protest and to raise their voice to demand a better future. It should be recalled that Colombia has been the most dangerous country in the world for trade unionists for several decades. And staying in Colombia, this Thursday, the National Strike Committee met with congressional representatives in a virtual public hearing in order to voice the population's demands. Representatives of the strike committee denounced that the executive branch has continued to ignore their demands, first issued last year. They also warned of the escalating violence in the country and criticised the state's abandonment of the most vulnerable social sectors in the midst of the health and economic crises. The protest leaders stressed that any process of dialogue with the authorities must generate concrete results that benefit the Colombian population. At the same time, they called for an end to the state security forces' violent repression of the mobilizations that have been ongoing for the past 9 days, demanding the total withdrawal of the regressive, neoliberal reforms proposed by the government of Ivan Duque to the tax, health and pension systems. Peruvian presidential candidate Pedro Castillo signed a political agreement with former candidate Veronica Mendoza on Wednesday to form an alliance ahead of the second round of the 2021 presidential elections and to promote progressive change in the country. Mendoza endorsed the candidacy of Castillo, who she said embodies a democratic solution to the political crisis in the country and would help to put a stop to the corrupt mafia currently in power. The agreement signed between both leftist political forces seeks to inaugurate a new era in which all voices are heard and Peru's sovereignty is recovered, according to a statement. The two progressive leaders also called to address the health and economic crises generated by COVID-19 and to reactivate the economy by prioritising the generation of employment and leaving behind the current economic model while deepening democracy and the exercise of rights for all. Guatemala's disaster relief authorities remained on high alert this Thursday due to renewed activity at Pakaya Volcano following a brief pause after one of the most extensive activity episodes in recent years. According to the Specialized National Institute, a new lava flow started on Thursday after the volcano registered a change of activity from explosive to effusive on April 29th, meaning the lava is steadily flowing out of the volcano onto the ground and causing a new fissure on its northwest flank. Taking into consideration this new activity, the Pakaya National Park authorities decided to maintain restrictions on climbing the volcano. However, authorities stated that no local communities are currently at risk of being affected by the new lava flow, but it's too early to predict how this new eruptive episode will evolve. In the US city of Atlanta, Black Lives Matter protesters erupted after the police department reinstated Officer Garrett Wolfe after appealing to the Atlanta Civil Service Board as he awaits a murder trial for shooting African-American Rayshard Brooks. The decision to reinstate the officer was delivered on Wednesday, according to the City of Atlanta website. The order argued that the board's sole purpose is to examine the issues of adverse employment of actions under the Atlanta City Code, and the board was not charged with determining or referencing the criminality of Wolfe's actions, given that to date he has not been indicted. Meanwhile, dozens of Black Lives Matter protesters descended on Atlanta City Hall to express outrage at the decision, as the officer was charged with 11 counts over Brooks' death, including felony murder. However, the trial date has not been set yet. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Polling stations have closed across the United Kingdom, where local elections were held this Thursday, the first since the beginning of the pandemic and a test for the unity of the country. Dubbed Super Thursday due to the amount of elections to be held on the same day, every adult in England, Scotland and Wales was able to cast at least one vote, which is rare outside a general election, as many elections had been postponed from last year due to COVID-19. Elections for the Scottish and Welsh Parliaments, 143 local councils and 13 mayors in England, including the capital London, were held. According to a poll by Sky News, it's expected that the Scottish National Party will secure a narrow parliamentary majority in the vote, which would put it on track to proceed with a second referendum on Scottish independence. Authorities are unsure how long it will take to count votes while keeping to social distancing requirements, with the first results not expected until Friday and some unlikely to be known until Monday. And this Thursday, people across Scotland went to the polls in an election that could act as a prior step to the breakup of the United Kingdom. The Scottish National Party, which has led a minority government since 2016, said a big victory would give it the moral right and political momentum to hold another referendum on whether Scotland should become an independent sovereign state. Party leader Nicola Sturgeon argues that Brexit has further fueled the case for Scottish independence by dragging Scotland out of the European Union against its will. The UK as a whole voted in 2016 to leave the bloc, but a majority of Scottish voters voted to remain in the European Union. Sturgeon said that if she wins a majority, she will pass legislation through the Scottish Parliament for a new independence referendum, forcing British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to challenge the law in court if he wants to stop it.
I hope the SNP win because we're looking for a second independence referendum, especially since we've now left the EU. I'm also hoping that the Greens will hopefully get a couple more seats because I think that climate change is something that really needs to be addressed now. So hopefully less seats for Conservatives.
Hoping that the SNP don't get in, but I think they will. But I'd like Labour to do it because I think SNP are just too focused, to me, independence, which I don't want. I'd rather be stuck together. We'll get the healthcare needs to get taken care of, get out of COVID, get businesses back up and running, get unemployment, people back to work.
French trawlers withdrew from waters around the British-held island of Jersey on Thursday after a protest over post-Brexit fishing rights that led to a brief standoff between British and French Navy and coastal patrol boats. Britain and France sent 2 of their Navy and coastal patrol ships to waters near the Channel Island amid tensions between the two neighbours over post-Brexit fishing rights. The country's posture was sparked by a protest of around 50 to 70 French fishing boats, which gathered outside the port on Thursday morning, raising fears of a blockade, threatening food and energy supplies. At the centre of the dispute are post-Brexit arrangements for the shared waters in the 13-mile stretch between France and Jersey. New licences were issued on Friday, the last day of a 4-month grace period after Brexit, which ended the 200-year-old Granville Bay Treaty on shared fishing rights.
We come today because we have always fished in the waters there. We have always fished here, and then overnight they take away all our fishing rights. These are agreements we have had for a very long time. We wanted more of an agreement to work together, as we have always worked. They come and they deliver all their goods, so they can sell all their goods. And we come and fish in the waters there, so everyone benefits.
Disclose, an NGO that promotes investigative journalism, has revealed the health disaster sparked by nuclear tests conducted by France from 1966 to 1996 in French Polynesia, resulting in lasting effects on the population. More than 25 years later, the consequences of the test come to light after the NGO conducted 2 years of analysis covering 2,000 pages of French military documents declassified in 2013 by the Defence Ministry concerning nuclear tests on the archipelago. The investigation confirmed the exposure to radiation of the inhabitants of the islands during the 6 nuclear tests considered to be the most contaminating in the history of French tests in the Pacific, resulting in leukemia, lymphoma and cancer of the thyroid, lung, breast and stomach. For instance, a reassessment of the impact of the Centaur test carried out in July 1974 revealed that approximately 100,000 people were infected, almost the entire Polynesian population at the time. The study concludes by stressing that French authorities have concealed the true impact of nuclear testing on the health of Polynesians for more than 50 years. The victims also offered their testimonies.
The fish can no longer be eaten. The moray eels in the mountains, the coconut trees. The fish are rotting on the beach. Lots of rotting fish on the beach. They are all dead. The stones, they float on the water. We don't know what poisoned the fish, but when we ate it, diarrhea, vomiting, infirmary. Ouch, ouch, ouch.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.